All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our now fourth video for physics. And this will be the last video of our pre-physics booklet. After this, actually, I'll be putting the second booklet up online on Monday next week. But today we want to finish things off with our last skill that we really need before we can really start doing physics. And this is actually one of the most common unit conversions we're going to be doing in the physics unit. So this is the one that you're going to want to get the most handle on. So I'm calling this lesson converting complex units, all right? And all I mean by a complex unit compared to the units we were looking at before, like meters and kilometers and stuff like that, is we actually have two units built into one. So in physics, where we find this most commonly is with speed, right? Because speed is in kilometers per hour or meters per second. And so I have two separate units that I need to convert. So that's why it's a little bit more tricky for us to do. But we are still going to follow the exact same procedures we did for converting normal units. We're going to find our unit conversion factor. We're going to multiply by the correct setup of that unit conversion factor, all right? But this time we have to do it twice because we're converting two different units. So we're going to do this in two steps. I find it's always easiest to convert from kilometers to meters or meters to kilometers. It could be either of these, okay? But it's always good to do this step first. I think it's just because it makes the most sense in our heads, right? The second step then is we have to convert the hours to seconds, or if I flip the conversion around, you have to start with seconds and convert to hours, all right? And this step here is the part that's a little bit tougher because it's going to look just slightly different from what we were doing last week, but it really is the same thing. Okay, so we're going to take a look at, I'm going to do one example just on here that's not in your guys' booklets, and then the other two examples we're going to do are on page 11 of your booklet right at the top. All right, so let's take a look. All right, so this first example here is not in your booklet. Okay, I just want you to watch what I do here and listen to it as I explain. The next two examples are in your book. All right, so this first one here, what we're going to do is convert between 30 kilometers per hour. We want to change that to meters per second. All right. We often have to do this conversion, like we talk about speed all the time in day-to-day life as kilometers per hour because that's what our car is measured in, right? Meters per second is actually more applicable to us for physics, and the only reason we say that is because meters is our base unit for distance, and so a lot of our calculations are based on the fact that we're using meters to begin with, all right? And this will make a little bit more sense when we get to acceleration, which is coming way in the future. Anyway, so what we're going to do here is we're going to take the number we're given in the problem, 30 kilometers per hour, but I'm going to write it a little bit different. Rather than using that slash, I'm going to write it like this, okay? The reason I'm doing that is it starts to look more like an actual unit conversion type of problem. This looks more like what we're familiar with when we talked about unit conversion last week, all right? And when I said the first step here was to convert kilometers to meters. So we know, because we've talked about it before, that there are 1,000 meters in 1 kilometer, or 1 kilometer is made up of 1,000 meters. Okay, so I want to just take these two unit conversion factors and just figure out which one to multiply by. If you've done the work on unit conversion factors, this one's pretty simple. We want to multiply by the one on the left, all right? But today, more than we did last time, I want to focus on why this one and not this one. I find a lot of students fall into the trap of saying, oh, I want to convert this one because my meters is on top and that's the unit I want. And that's true, but the reason we want that setup is not just because meters is on top. It actually has to do with the fact that kilometers is on the bottom, right? Remember, I talked about this in the video. We want our kilometers to cancel out. All right, so what I'm going to do in my problem here is, I'll just get rid of this guy. What I'm going to do in my problem is I'm going to take this 30 kilometers per hour, and I'm going to multiply by 1,000 meters over 1 kilometer, right? And when I do that, I go 30 times 1,000 divided by 1. My kilometers cancels out, and what you'll notice, and you might have questions about this, is, well, what happens to this hour? It's 1 is our hour, and we're just multiplying it by 1, and this kilometer just goes away, so this just sticks around, right? So my answer here when I multiply this is that I went, oops, wrong color, is that I went 30,000 meters in 1 hour, okay? And again, if you're a little confused, I basically just went 1 times 1, the kilometers gets canceled out, the hour sticks around, so really I'm just taking this and just dragging it over with me to my answer. Okay, so mathematically, we don't do anything with the hour, which is nice. We'll deal with it now. Okay, so my second step, what I want to do is get rid of hours. I want to turn it into seconds. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my 30,000 meters that I have, 30,000 meters per hour, okay? And now I don't want to convert meters anymore. I want to convert hours, okay? We know from our work that we did before, and I'm just going to erase a couple of things here. From the work that we did before, we know that the unit conversion factor for hours to seconds is going to be that there are 3,600 seconds in 1 hour, or 1 hour has 3,600 seconds in it, okay? We want to figure out which of these two setups to multiply by, all right? Normally, if I was just like last week when I was saying, hey, just convert hours to seconds, it was really easy. You just picked this one every time because seconds was on top. But remember, the reason we picked this one is because we wanted hours to cancel out, meaning we wanted it on the opposite side of this line from where it is here. All right, so I actually want to multiply by this setup right here, 1 hour over 3,600 seconds, okay? So this time I want to multiply by this, okay? And the reason I'm doing that is because I am technically dividing by hours here and then multiplying by hours here, which gets hours to cancel out, and what I'll be left with is meters over seconds, which is what this is. Okay, so what I'm going to do mathematically is we're going to go through 30,000 times 1, then divided by 3,600. All right, and when I put that in my calculator, what I'm going to get as an answer is 8.333 repeating meters for every 1 second. Okay, or with the correct number of significant digits, which I do care about now, I'm going to call this 8.3 meters per second. Okay, now it seems like a lot there, so I want to point out a couple of things before we move on to our next examples, things that I think will help you guys out, especially if you're a little bit more math savvy. Okay, in this first step, there's all these ones down here, and there's all these ones in the second step. Ones, as we know mathematically, don't really do anything. When I multiply by 1, it doesn't do anything. When I divide by 1, it doesn't do anything. So all these little ones, kind of we can ignore. And what you can actually, when you look at the actual math that we did, all we really did was go 30 times 1,000, right, to get this. And then from there, we took that number, and when we ignore these ones, all we did was divide by 3,600. So a shortcut, especially if you're a little bit better at math, is when you want to convert from kilometers per hour to meters per second, you just take the number you were given, multiply by 1,000, divide by 3,600. Now, that trick, that shortcut, that is something you're going to have to memorize. If you want to use that trick, you have to memorize it because I don't give you that exact unit conversion factor, but it's something that would be helpful for you. The other thing to pay attention to, and this is true every single time I go from kilometers per hour to meters per second, my number is going to get smaller. Okay, so kilometers per hour will always be bigger than its meters per second. So if you mess up and kind of do the opposite, and you get a bigger meters per second than you did kilometers per hour, you did something wrong. Okay, so quick shortcut, instead of doing all this in 2 steps, you could just go times 1,000, divide by 3,600. All right, note that as long as you get a smaller number than you started with, you probably did it the correct way. All right, so this is the one that's in your book on page 11. It's the first example. I'm going to try and do this one a little bit quicker than I did the last one because I don't have to do all the explanation, but I will talk about what I'm doing. All right, so here we're going 50 kilometers per hour to meters per second. Based on what I just said on the last slide, we know that our numbers should get smaller. So that's something we're going to watch for. Okay, so again, it's helpful to write this as 50 kilometers over 1 hour just to get it set up in kind of a unit conversion factor kind of setup to it. Okay, the first step is always to convert our kilometers to meters. So what I'm going to do is multiply by 1,000 meters over 1 kilometer. That's my unit conversion factor. Okay, I already went through why we chose that one. Our kilometers will cancel out when I multiply this. So I'm going to go 50 times 1,000 divided by 1, which gets me 50,000 meters per 1 hour, which makes sense, right? If I went 50 kilometers in an hour, that's the same as going 50,000 meters in an hour, right? They're just, yeah, switched to each other, okay? For our second step, we want to get rid of that hour. So now we're going to use our new number, our 50,000 meters, divided by over 1 hour, I should say. And we're going to multiply by that same setup we had before. Here's our unit conversion factor, 1 hour over 3,600 seconds. Again, I have to use it this way so that my hours cancels out and I get left with meters over seconds. Mathematically, I'm just going to go 50,000 times 1, divide by 3,600. And when I put that in my calculator, I get 13.888 repeating meters per second. I want to have the right number of significant digits. So looking back to our last lesson, I started with 2 digits here, so my answer should be 2 digits. So I'm going to round this to 14 meters per second. Okay, and if you're not sure why I rounded there, I want 2 digits, so I need these two. This 8 makes this 3 round up to a 4, and I'm only getting rid of decimal places, so I don't need to use scientific notation. All right? And again, when you look at mathematically the work that I did, when we ignore all these ones being in here, all I did was take 50, multiply by 1,000, and then divide it by 3,600. So that's a shortcut for those of you who can kind of pick up on that a little bit faster. All right, this next example, we're going to go the opposite way. Okay, so we're going to convert meters per second into kilometers per hour. But how we do it doesn't really change, all right? So we want to go 45 meters over 1 second. Okay, it's just easier to write it this way. And we're going to multiply by one of our 2 unit conversion factors. Okay, so either 1,000 meters over 1 kilometer or 1 kilometer over 1,000 meters. Okay, now this time we're going to want to use our second setup because I want to get rid of meters. So I want it underneath this line so that I'm multiplying by meters and then dividing by meters. Okay, so we're going to use this setup over here on the left. I'm just going to erase the other one as soon as I find the eraser. There we go. Okay, so we're going to multiply by this guy here. So we're going to throw that in. So I have 1 kilometer over 1,000 meters. Right? My meters is going to cancel out. And when I get my answer here, I'm going to go 45 times 1 divided by 1,000, which is 0.045 kilometers per hour. Okay? So if I went that's, 0.045 kilometers per second. Okay? Which makes sense, right? If I went 45 meters in a second, that means I only went 0.045 of a kilometer per second. Okay? So now step 2, we're going to take that new number that we have, 0.045 kilometers per second, and now we want to get rid of the seconds. Okay? So again, my unit conversion factors are 3,600 seconds per 1 hour, or 1 hour per 3,600 seconds. Sorry, it's getting a little messy up there. Okay. When I look at these, remember, I'm trying to get seconds to cancel out, which means right now seconds is on the bottom of this line. So when I multiply, I'm going to want to So when I multiply, I'm going to want to multiply so that seconds is now on top of this line, which means I want to use this unit conversion factor here. So I'm going to multiply by 3,600 seconds, divide by 1 hour. Okay. When I do this multiplication, the seconds are going to cancel out because they're on opposite sides of the line. So I'm going to go 0.045 times 3,600 divide by 1. And when I put that in my calculator, I'm going to get 162, I think almost exactly. So I'm going to get 162 kilometers per hour. Okay. Now, I always like to tell you guys to take a second to think about the answer you get to see if it makes sense. If something is going 45 meters every second, it's traveling really, really, really fast. Okay. That's like going over half the length of a football or soccer field in a second. Okay. That's moving very, very quickly. All right. So when I convert this to kilometers per hour, and we have a little bit more of a sense for kilometers per hour because when we're driving and things like that, 162 kilometers an hour is really fast. So that does match the speed that we just got. Okay. So everything looks good there. We double checked that our number that we got this time is bigger than the one we started with, which makes sense because kilometers per hour will always be bigger than meters per second. The last thing that we have to do, and get in the habit of doing this, is we have to check to see if our significant digits are correct. I got 3 significant digits in my answer, but my problem only has 2 significant digits, which means I need to round this. All right, and back to our rounding lesson from Wednesday, I guess. If I'm rounding it with 2 digits, I'm going to round it there, which means I'm now getting rid of a number in the 1 spot. I can't just write 16 and that be my final answer. So I have to round this, and I have to use scientific notation because I'm getting rid of a whole number. I'm not just getting rid of decimal places like I did in the last one. So when I round this, my decimal place right now is here. I need to move it 2 spaces, and that 2 keeps the 6 as a 6. So I'm going to go 1.6 times 10. I'm going to move my decimal place twice, so to the power of 2 kilometers per hour. Okay, so that's how we convert complex units. It's the same thing we've been doing. We just break it up into 2 steps. If you guys noticed, again, like before where I was saying, oh, when you go from kilometers per hour to meters per second, you always multiply by 1,000, then divide by 3,600. We do the reverse here. If you look here, all I did when I go from meters per second to kilometers per hour is I divided by 1,000. And then over here, I multiplied by 3,600. All right. So if you want to convert from kilometers per hour to meters per second, meters per second to kilometers per hour, take the number you're given in the problem, multiply by 3,600, divide by 1,000. Gets you the right answer every time. Okay. You just need to make sure you put them in the right spot. All right. I just wanted to take a quick second to just briefly summarize, especially for those shortcuts. So for the shortcuts, if you're going from kilometers per hour to meters per second, you multiply by 1,000 over 3,600 every time. Just take the number you're given in the question. If you're going from meters per second to kilometers per hour, then you always want to multiply by 3,600 divided by 1,000. Okay? And it's worth noting, just because we can check things, it's always easy to check things, meters per second will always be less than kilometers per hour. And then when you look at these 2 conversion factors, that actually makes sense, right? When I go from kilometers per hour to meters per second, I'm basically multiplying by something that's less than 1, because 1,000 divided by 3,600 is something really low. Actually, let me just double check what it is. I think it's 0.27. Yeah, 0.28 basically when I round. When I multiply by this, I'm multiplying essentially by 3.6, right? Because that's what's happening here. I hope this is helpful. I'm intending to spend a little more time going through examples with you guys with this one on Thursday's online class. But for now, attempt some of the questions on page 11 and see how you do with that. And I will talk to you guys on Thursday. All right, have a great day.